Section 5.7, Solving Quadratic Equations by the Quadratic Formula. So in last section we started solving quadratic equations by factoring, but as we learned with factoring, you can't always factor a polynomial. So in those cases, as long as you have a quadratic equation, so you've got an exponent squared and that's your highest exponent, we can use this quadratic formula. And this always works. So even in those cases when factoring did not, this always works. So some key things here. I know this looks complicated, but trust me, after using it several times, this will be in your brain. If you need help memorizing it, there are plenty of songs on YouTube. Just go on YouTube and search quadratic formula. A bunch of stuff will come up, and that can help you remember it as well. Notice the equation has to be equal to 0, just like when we were factoring, the equation had to be equal to 0. And it can only be used on quadratic equations. So this variable must be to the second power. If it is to any other power, you cannot use the quadratic formula. The last thing I do want to point out is notice this plus or minus right here. And remember with factoring, we always got 2 answers. And that just gives us our 2 answers, but we only have to do most of the work once. It's just a way to ease our lives a little bit. So I already have the quadratic formula listed for us, and I'm going to do that a couple of times on here just to make sure that we remember it. It helps to figure out what our A, B, and C's are. So if we go back to this page, notice A is with the x squared, B is with the x, C is by itself. So our A is 2, our B is -3, and our C is -5. It helps to get those straight. Do you have to write that every time? No. Is it helpful? Probably. So now let's go ahead and substitute into our equation. I tend to write everything exactly as listed here and just use parentheses around each piece. It helps us keep our negatives straight. So we have -3 plus or minus square root b squared, so -3 quantity squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So when we have a minus a negative, this just becomes a +3. -3 squared is 9. We have 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times a -5 is -40. Negative times a negative is a positive, so plus 40. 2 times 2 is 4. Simplify what's in your square root. 9 plus 40 is 49. Square root of 49 is 7. So that leads us to our 2 answers. So we've got x equals 3 plus 7 over 4. And we have x equals 3 minus 7 over 4. That's where this plus or minus is going to come into play. So we've got 10 over 4, which we can reduce down to 5 over 2. Or we have -4 over 4, which reduces down to -1. We do have 2 answers, because think about even when we were solving by factoring. We got 2 answers by factoring, so it only makes sense that if we're solving the same type of equation, we should get the same number of answers. So this next one, notice it's not equal to 0 yet, so that's the first thing we got to do. So add that 4x to both sides. A is 2, B is 4, C is 1. And go ahead and plug it in. b squared, so 4 squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared is 16 minus 8 over 4. Now, square root of 8 doesn't come out to a nice easy number like we would want it to, but think back to chapter 1. We can break down the square root of 8 to 4 times 2, which is 2 times 2. Here's a pair. And now what we can do is factor out a 2 from our numerator. And notice 2 divided by 2 is 1. We just don't have to write that one. You can if you want. And then 2 and 4 can divide out. We're left with a 2. One thing I do want to point out is I do realize there's still a 2 here inside the root, but you can't factor out another 2 to divide this one out because this is inside the root. Its rules are completely different. Think of it like a variable. It's stuck in there. It can't go anywhere. If you actually did square root of 2 on your calculator, you'd get 1 point something, some big long number. And so we have to leave it like this. Same thing here. This one's not equal to 0, so we got to do that first. A is 15, B is negative 14, C is negative 8, X equals negative B, so negative 14, B squared, negative 14 squared, minus 4 times 15 times negative 8, all over 2 times 15. So we get 14 because minus a negative is 14. Sorry, minus a negative is positive. 14 squared is 196. Notice here we have a negative times a negative, so it's going to be plus. 4 times 15 times 8 is 480, all over 30. $196 plus 480 is 676. 676 we can break down 2 and 338. So notice we have a pair of 13s and a pair of 2s. $13 times 2 is 26. There's nothing left over. So now, once again, we've got our two answers. We've got x is 14 plus 26 over 30, or 14 minus 26 over 30. Let's do the addition first. 14 plus 26 is 40. Divided by 30 is 4/3. 14 minus 26 is negative 12. Negative 12 divided by 30 is negative 2/5. So either value of this for x will make our original equation work. Same here, it's already set equal to 0. A is 4, B is 6, C is 1. Notice we have a w for our variable this time, so it's w equals. we can factor out a 2 from the numerator. And so then dividing this 2 is a 1 and this by 2 is a 4. And there we go. We still have to get everything on the same side. Typically, I like to have the squared term positive. It just makes it slightly easier to work with. So I'm going to move everything to the left. This time we're using A. So make sure you use A in your quadratic formula. $105 doesn't reduce down. 5 times 21, which is 7 times 3. So we can leave our answer like that. And that's the quadratic formula.